joining us for the first in this series. And the focus is going to be on writing strategies. Um, Sometimes we have ideas about what we want to write, but it's the making of it, the making it happen rather, that gets in the way. And so we have Dr. Jana Bonfini and Dr. Adrienne Baggs, who have had success in writing and publishing. And so we thought we would kind of peek into their minds to see what has helped them to be able to just carve out that time and create the things that we need to create as scholars. So let me just kind of turn it over to them, and they can choose who wants to share first about their own writing strategies.
I'm happy to defer if you want to go, Adrienne, but I can go too. It's fine.
I don't really have anything like formulated, I just figured we would kind of toss things around. So if you have something right at the front of your brain, go for it and I'll just kind of keep going. We can toss it around.
Okay, so I will say a strategy that works for me. I'm very extroverted, so I like working with other people, and I'm also more likely to keep commitments to other people than I am to myself. So if I'm working on a project, I really do like to work with others because then that makes me more likely to stay on task and stay committed to the project because I don't want to let the other person down. So most of the things that I've done with colleagues or peers or students. And I think for me, that's really been helpful. So first of all, I like working with other people. And I work with people who are wonderful. Ginevra included. It's really nice to be able to spend that time with someone you like and enjoy, but also do the work together. And I do think oftentimes two or three heads is better than one. So that's really important. But for me, it's to be able to know that it needs to get done because we have a deadline. I don't want to let somebody else down, but then carving out that time to do my own sort of research work, writing. I think that's the part that can get difficult because life gets in the way. We as faculty members, and the other faculty members on here, and some of you teach as well, you get so many emails every day, all day. Like, I don't know about y'all, but I wake up, I look at my phone as I'm walking the dog, I hit that little Outlook app, I do my download, and I have 47 emails, right? And so maybe that morning I had planned that I was going to, look at all the articles that I pulled and see what's relevant and start to, put together part of a lit review. And that goes out the window because I just spent 3 hours on email. So sometimes it has to be, I'm not looking at that email until a certain time of day. Or maybe I carve out time and I turn off my phone. Because if my phone is there, I'm just going to be honest, if my phone is buzzing, I'm going to look. Like, I can't help it. I don't have that willpower to be like, it's fine. I'm going to pick it up and look at it. So I have to like turn it off. I have to put it in the other room. So carving out specific time for writing and researching, I think, has been really important. I used to think I'll just catch as catch can. And if I have 20 minutes here, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Does not happen. Like it like needs to be carved out. Now maybe some other folks are super disciplined and you're like, I have 15 minutes. That's enough time to write a paragraph. Oh, no, 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 no. No, I need more time to like get started, to remember what I'm doing, to really engage with it. So for me, I need a chunk. I probably need a good 45 minutes at a minimum for my sessions. And then because my attention span is my attention span, I could go like 2 hours, maybe three, but that's it. That's the cap. That's all that's going to happen that day for like that kind of deep work. And I really do try to schedule at least 2 sessions of sort of deep work every single week. So that might mean I'm going to write that conference proposal in this session. In this other session, I'm going to review a lit review that I'm working on for an article. And something else, like so I really do try to plan it. I used to write to-do lists, just general to-do lists. And I found that when I assign a time to it, it is more likely to get done than just having the to-do list. Because I don't know if you've had this experience, but I've had to-do lists where something moves from to-do list to to-do list. It just keeps following the to-do list. And you look back and you find your to-do list from the 2 weeks prior and you're like, why is that still on my list? right? That is still on my list. This is nonsense. Like, I've had 2 weeks. Why do I keep moving it? And because I never gave it a time. I never said this is when it's getting done. And because of that, everything from, you know, answering emails to going down a deep dive into Counseling Today articles from 2010, to sewing point shoes for my daughter. Like everything else seems to take priority, right, Lorian? Like Ella and I know that takes a long time. Okay. And yes, they can sew them themselves, but they don't look nice. And we just spent so much money on these shoes, and we'll just do them, right? We'll just do it. And there goes my writing. There goes that task, right? So giving each task marching orders so that I can say, when Ginevra sends me a draft, I can say, okay, I will get this to you on Friday, because I carved out time on Friday to review the draft and give her the feedback. So if I do that, it is so much more likely to get done than if I'm just like, I'll get it to you soon, right? Because if I would say soon, it would be Tuesday, Wednesday, and then she's like, "Hey, I sent that last week," and I'm like, "Oh, hold on, another minute," and she's like, "Okay, you're the worst committee member ever," right? So for that, like, I really do like to have constraints on myself, because if not, it's going to go from list to list to list. Okay, and now I'll be quiet because I'm sure Adrienne has so many more tools and techniques that we can all learn from her.
I actually have a couple of follow-up questions for you on that. So when you say that you put some time around it, are you saying that you actually put it on your Outlook calendar so that when you look, you have this meeting here maybe, and then this 2-hour chunk?
Yeah, it says hold.
Yeah.
It'll
Okay.
say hold on my calendar. So I'll block some time and it'll say hold. It doesn't have like an appointment, like there's nobody attached to it. It's not like I like did a calendar invite for Ginevra and be like, this is when I'm reviewing your stuff. Like, I didn't do that. But it's like I block it off so that I know this is going to be my dedicated space. And sometimes things come up, right? And you have to move things around, and that's okay. But I try to find like another time where I can still keep that commitment. And then if I need to change that commitment, and if I have to say like, hey, I don't think I can get it today, it's going to have to slip to Monday. Is that okay? For you to do what you need to do and so I will try to do that, because honestly, if I don't give myself a deadline, if I don't have a dedicated space, the chance that it's going to get pushed is high.
So I'm wondering, because I'm hearing a little bit of that in here. When you first started talking, you were talking about the benefits of writing with other people. But I'm wondering if you have an accountability partner also, like if you are saying, hey, I don't need you to meet with me. I just need to tell you what I'm doing so that you can ask me if I did it. Does that fit into your practice at all?
So when I'm doing projects with other people, it does. So for example, my dissertation chair, she wrote the trauma book, and the second edition recently came out. Everybody should get it. It's amazing. I also have a bootleg copy electronically. I probably shouldn't say that, but if you want it, I have it. But I have a chapter in that. And so when we were developing the chapter, when we were developing the supplemental resources, there were deadlines, and I also didn't want to put her in a position where we're all trying to get things in on the deadline, because that often happens when you're editing a book, where everybody just sends things last minute, and I didn't want to be that girl. So I tried to make sure that I had my things to her a week beforehand, so that she had time to review it before the rest of them came in. So for me, I said, okay, to spare you the deluge, like from me, I will do this in advance. And she's like, okay, that's great. And so I felt that I was accountable to her deadline, to trying to make her life a little bit easier. So that's for yes. And then so when one of my colleagues, Beth Ventura, and I, Robin knows Beth, she worked with her at one point. We were partners in private practice before I moved to Georgia. And so we wrote a case book together. And we definitely have different styles. Beth is very sort of loosey-goosey with deadlines. She's like, I'll get it when I get it. And I'm like, okay, let me try to stay on track. So in that sense, I was a little bit over functioning. So I was like, okay, we need to have these chapters in by this date, because if not, our editor is going to scream at us. We need to pick the cover by this date. And so coming up with a system for the two of us in how we work together, being quite different in personalities and in workflow and style. So I think it depends on who you're working with. With students, especially doctoral students, I know they're so eager to get feedback. on their good work. And I really do try to turn that around pretty quickly for them. It can be hard. You know, for those of you who have worked on dissertations, I know Dr. Baggs and Dr. Stretcher, pros at sharing dissertations. You can get some in a queue. You can get like 6 drafts all at once, and that takes a long time, you know, especially to review them in a way that you need to review them as a chair. You know, it is a fine tooth comb. You're looking at references. You're like, hey, you know, maybe you should use original sources here instead of citing somebody as citing Freud or citing somebody as citing Rogers. You need to do a deeper dive and read and engage with the original thinkers in this work. So I think it depends on who sort of I'm working with. You know, and then we always have those projects like a conference proposal that you might be working on with somebody else. And there's a hard deadline, right? If you don't get that in, like you're not presenting, right? It's just not happening. There's no after the fact. Hey, ACEs, I know the deadline was the 31st. I realize it's the 1st at noon, but can you make an exception? They might say yes, but probably going to say no because they get 4,600 proposals for ACEs in Denver because everyone wants to go to ACEs. So there's that too. So I think for me, Robin, it depends on who I'm working with. So some people I feel more accountable to than others. If it's just like a peer, like one of my good friends, he and I often collaborate, but he's very busy and he's like, hey, I didn't get to it. I'm like, okay, and I let it go, right? And we just won't do it. We've had an article together that we've drafted for probably a year, and eventually it will get done. It's like a snail's pace, and that's just because, you know, given his schedule, we just haven't made that a priority, and that's okay. So that's a to-do list that keeps floating. But other things have really hard deadlines, and so I try to be mindful about that.
So another follow-up question to that, I've found like when I initially write, the flow is good. When I have to go back and edit, it's kind of like cleaning baseboards, and I hate to clean baseboards. So like, what do you do to motivate yourself for those like really drudgery type of activities with being productive?
So for me, the first draft is the drudgery. I don't like writing first drafts because they're always terrible. Like they're not good. I mean, for any of you, like especially if you're in the dissertation process, go back to the first thing you submitted to your chair, right? Go back and look at it, and you're gonna be like, oh, what were you thinking? Right? Like, oh my gosh, this writing. Oh my goodness gracious, you had no idea. Right? Like, so, you know, you kind of feel bad for your former self. I like the revision process because I think once I have things down on paper, I can do something with that. It's for me looking at that blank screen and getting started and getting that ball rolling. Once I get going, it gets better. But for me, it's like the opening of the document, putting the title in, setting up all your margins and your APA parameters, and then you're like, oh, now I have to really do the work. I love the research part of it. I will read articles all day long. I get so excited. I go down rabbit holes. So fun, but like having to like bring it all back and then put it in the first draft. The first draft is hard. First draft for me is like cleaning those baseboards, right? That's the heavy lift. For me, the editing process, I like that. I think it's fun when you get to see things shape up, when you're like, ooh, I can add a chart here, I can add a graph, like go ahead and do this, right? And then it comes together. I love that. But the whole first draft, oof, that's the heavy lift.
So what do you do to motivate yourself for that?
Well, usually because I'm working with a student or a colleague and I have a deadline, I'm like, oh, there it is. Nothing like a deadline to give that little bit of adrenaline and some motivation there. It's the projects like when I was doing my own dissertation process, and I had all the time in the world to read and explore and look at data and and do that, where I was like off in La La Land for a while, and my chair's like, I need to see pages, and I'm like, well, I'm looking at this and I'm exploring that. She's like, pages, like typed on a Word document. And I was like, right. And I'll send that after I'm done doing all this other research. And she's like, okay, this is a very common thing with doctoral students. You guys get this imposter syndrome, and you think if you don't research everything that has ever been said about this topic, that you're somehow missing something and I'm going to call you on it. She's like, I'm still going to find things that you didn't do. And that's okay. That's my job as your chair. That's okay. But I need to see something because I cannot give you feedback on a blank page. So I think for me, I need to have that accountability. I need to have somebody who's like, hey, let's do it. I'm starting to work on like a solo project, and it's like kind of a challenge because I put other things ahead of it. So things I'm working on with other people ahead of that. So that'll be my challenge for 2023, is to sort of work on that piece, um, and keep myself accountable, because that's the big thing. Is like it's really easy to think about somebody else and their time and not want to waste their time, right? And not want to not keep promises, not be productive, all that. But for your own stuff, when it's just you, that's the hard part. That's where like discipline comes in. That's where you really have to get protective around time and carve out that importance. So, fun fact, I drove from Pittsburgh to Atlanta over the holidays because well, I drove up, but then I also with my daughter, but then I drove back just by myself because I wasn't going to take my dog on the flight, because he gets skittish. So I literally drove for this Yorkie who is like this big. So I'm driving and I was like, you know what? I'm going to make use of this time. So my car has the system where I can like, talk to Siri, and I did all this pre-reading before the holidays, and I kind of just riffed on what I wanted to do and put it in my notes, right? So in a way, during that very long drive, I ended up with my really craptastic first draft, right? And so because of that, I can then edit it and I can start to do that work. So that's like my new fun thing that I do in my car, is like everything that I've read and thought about, I start to do that, and then I try to organize those thoughts afterwards. So that's how I'm trying to keep myself accountable, because I do a lot of like kid drop off and driving, and because I'm in Atlanta's an hour away from Atlanta, so you're always in traffic all the time, every day. So it's a great way for me to stay productive. And then I'll have it read back what I wrote and things like, so that's kind of cool too. And it's like, oh, that's terrible. What are you doing? So that's how I do it. So carving out that time. So that'll be my challenge for 2023.
I really like the idea of using some newer technologies. When I first went to college, like we were still in typewriter phase, computers weren't a thing. And so like, when you put it there, you had to have your whatever those liquid paper strips and to make those edits. But here it's such a great idea to think about like speaking your thoughts out loud, and then you see the transcript, and it just gives another place where you don't feel like, you absolutely have to have that perfect paragraph.
I do this activity with my doc students where I had them break out into groups and kind of give an elevator pitch about their dissertation. Because if they're going to conferences and people are like, oh, you're a doc student, where are you in the process? They're like, oh, I'm in the proposal stage. Oh, what's your dissertation about? Go, right? How do you take this document that's growing every single day, and getting more refined? How do we distill it into a 30-second soundbite, right? If they want to know more, they'll ask about it more, and then you can do all the other stuff. But how do you push this into like a little compact package that makes that person go, wow, that's amazing, that's interesting, and then makes you feel good about it too, right? So how do we do that? How do we present our work? And so I do think sometimes speaking it out loud. My dissertation chair, I love her to pieces, but she kind of knows me well enough that she's like, I want you to read out loud your chapter 1. Read it out loud and let me know what you think about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I use some of the same words over and over again. She's like, yeah, you don't notice that when you're reading, but you notice that when you're speaking. I was like, I have a lot of long sentences. She's like, yep. Kind of break that up a little bit, right? So those kinds of things were really helpful. Like I said, I had such a good mentor. She was wonderful. She still is wonderful. I still keep in touch with her. We talk probably every other week. It's great. It's like a lifelong friendship. So it's wonderful. But I was really mentored well in terms of that, and she was highly productive.
Right. Well, thank you. And we'll have opportunity for everyone to ask questions, but let's hear from Dr. Baggs now.
That was so cool to hear you pull back the curtain on what you do. We don't do this often as faculty or ever really. And I bet there's a lot of variability. There's probably some similarities, but a lot of variability too. So we should do this more as faculty. I was thinking as you were chatting, to get to know each other in that way. I think the first thing you said, I think, was along working with other people. And you said you're an extrovert and I'm an introvert, but that still holds true for me too, because the periods, so I was like ambitious doctoral student person, and worked with people who were productive. So I was productive because I wanted to work with them and do good work. And then I got burnt out and stopped everything and left academia and didn't produce a thing, right? But did some other fun stuff. And then came back and struggled to be as productive because I was in a teaching institution and research wasn't quite a priority, whereas I was in a research institution prior to that in my doctoral program. And it was just a requirement. It was part of the culture. So in order to live there, you were producing. So when I got into a teaching institution, that pressure wasn't there, which was nice because I could focus on my teaching, but I wasn't writing and disseminating as much. I was doing more presentations. So there's like a lull in productivity. And then this little surge has come back really recently for me. And it is because I am working with doctoral students again. And that is like the number one most influential factor. And so whereas before I was working with mentors who were pushing me, now I'm working with doctoral students who I feel committed to, and making sure that the commitments that we make, I stick to. So I wish in my personal development over my life that my commitment to myself will grow and I can just do something because I'm committed to myself, but I'm not quite there personally. So I'm still committed to other people, maybe a little bit more than I would be to my own research ideas and things like that. So I get people involved. And when you guys reach out, doctoral students reach out and want to work on a project, usually I'm down because I know that it's mutually beneficial and we can kind of push each other, and students bring a kind of energy and commitment that I have found to be incredibly beneficial to my own career in the past couple of years. So other people has been big for me in different ways throughout the years. So about a year and a half ago, I started doing, I don't know if it's, I don't remember who it is. It may be like Stephen Covey or somebody like that, but it's just like this, people do this all the time in like productivity hack environments where you like put in, you have all these rocks, right? And the biggest rock, like if you try and put in all the rocks at random times, they're different sizes. This is like the worst demonstration. I should have like demonstrated it for you. But if you throw in all the rocks at different times, like randomly, you can't get all the rocks in the bucket or the glass, right? But if you put the big rock in first and then you put all the small rocks in, everything kind of fits. I don't know if that's actually true, that experiment. Maybe LA, I trust LA's perspective on that, but I have it in my mind, right? So then I'm like, okay, well, if that's true, then I need to start the day with my writing because it's the thing that gets pushed aside, as Dr. Bonfini was talking about. So I'm going to start. It's the most important thing, obviously not in my life, right? But when it comes to my professional work, right? The big rock is the writing. It's the dissemination of knowledge. It's the development of research. It's all that kind of productivity stuff, right? It's not my email. The big rock is not my email. So I started carving out most days of the week to when I sit down, I do my 20 to 30 minutes of personal, professional development work first before I get into anything else. And usually, if I can mentally say, and there's another book on this where like, if you can mentally say, I'll do 20 minutes, that feels digestible. Like that doesn't make me feel nauseous. Like 2 hours makes me like a little nauseous. So 20 minutes is like, anybody can do 20 minutes. So I sit down and I do 20 minutes and it usually turns into an hour, and that's okay. Like that's good. And if it doesn't, that's okay too, if I'm tired or whatever. So morning happens to be my time that I feel most sharp. And so that's what I choose. And it is at the beginning of the day, so it can't get pushed. I know some people really like to work at night and stuff like that. I don't know how that would look if your energy levels or your own rhythms, don't match that morning time, but it just happens to work for me. So putting it first, working with other people. This is like, take away the mystery, hire an editor. Like I use my professional development funds. When I was in graduate school, I was so overwhelmed. So I'm the opposite of Dr. Bonfini in that I can give you a mess but I do not want to clean it up. Like, I've got the ideas, I've got the research, I can spit it out. I'll talk to you all day about it. And then, but if you ask me to clean that up, I'm like, out. I'm going to leave that project and we're moving on to something new, something shinier, right? So in graduate school, I had a couple of colleagues who I would pay. They were like doctoral students too. So they gave me a great pay, whatever budget, or I had a budget and they were able to do it for kind of cheap, to help me edit. And then I exchanged with people editing projects for free. So there was like, at that time, it was like a cheap way to get some editing help and not have to clean up my own mess. Now I send my mess to a professional editor because I use my professional development funds not to travel. I use them for editing. So that's like recently what I've done to use that money, because everything has been there's been so much virtual. I want to start traveling again soon, but since things have been virtual, I've just been using a really fantastic editor. And oh my God, like imagine, like, it's like when, I'm not a play therapist, but you know how in play, they don't make the kids clean up. They just get to go and play. And then the therapist cleans up. I always thought that was, as a parent, I'm like, really? But that's how it works, because you should be able to be fully expressed, right? So I get to just express myself, get those references in. It's not a total disaster, but it's not good. And so then my editor really helps me go in and clean it up and say, this doesn't make sense. You're going to need more research here. And then I have like some juice to keep going because I haven't spent all day cleaning, which I hate. So I've got more energy. My morale is boosted, and I'll go in and I'll fix those references or find more research or do what I need to do to kind of take it to the next level. And then I send the mess back and we go back and forth. So yeah, that's been a really significant piece for me throughout the years. And it used to be, non-professional editing, friends for free, exchanging papers, or other doctoral students who were really good at writing, who were willing to, give me a great hourly rate. And then later on, using my professional development funds to use a really high-level professional editor.
Dr. Baggs, when you're struggling to get motivated, what things motivate you?
I think that those interventions are the ones that have helped, Robin, because they were done in response. So making sure I'm with people, I realize that that's unmotivating. Like, not being with people, for me, writing is not motivating. So I need to write alone, but the project needs to be in collaboration. Like, I can't really write with other people literally like in the same space writing together. I can't do that, or I don't like to do that. But the project is collaborative, so I can work on my own, but then know I'm tied to like a greater purpose, greater community kind of thing, project. So I wasn't motivated, so I started working with people again and realizing that that helps me get motivated. So that was a direct response to like getting motivation. And then also just realizing, again, like the time of the day, I realized I was lacking motivation at 3. Like, who sits down to write at 3 p.m. when you've checked all your email, like built some PowerPoints for a course? Like, there's just no motivation there. So then I was like, my motivation is in the morning. So then that was in response to increasing motivation, like to sit down and write was to do it as the first thing. So I guess those are the things that motivate me. And then needing help, like needing support and not feeling like even recently, even though I know people, like the most prolific, amazing writers use editors. Like, it's just a thing that people do. And I don't know where along the way, if this is like, I don't know, like a female thing or what, but it's just like, I felt like if I was getting support and then I wasn't writing it, right? Like, then I am not being true or lacking integrity or something like that, right? Like, I had to be doing everything, all the things, all the ideas, all the edits, in order for me to take credit. And it's just like, that is just not the reality of what happens in any kind of writing environment, whether you're talking about creative writing or academic writing or anything. Like, people it's a really common thing to like use editors. Like, the most, incredible writers use editors. So somewhere along the line, I'm like, okay, support doesn't mean that I didn't write this. Support doesn't mean that I'm lacking integrity in my work. Like, I don't need to be like super purist in that way. Like, I could just be a normal person who writes and, gets help.
Right now, unconditional positive regard is just this phrase that's coming to mind, like fully accepting who you are, what motivates you, and not putting pressure on yourself to be outside of who you are seems to be a place where maybe you just shed some of that pressure that exists in academia so that you can just freely sit and write.
Yeah.
This question is for both of you all, as well as Dr. Stretch. Like, I don't know enough about this to really speak intelligently, but I have a friend who's told me she uses a method called the Pomodoro method. And the way she explained it is like there's this kind of amount of time she has to work, and then she gets to do something she wants to do for, whatever. In her mind, or how it works for her, is M&Ms. So like she works this much, and then she gets maybe 3 or 4 M&Ms and maybe listen to a song, and then she goes back. So I will just share with you all. I don't know why. Sometimes when I'm like, I also write in chunks. I can't do the 20 minutes. It has to be a couple of hours. But when I need a break, brushing my teeth, I have no idea what that's about, but just it's a thing that motivates me or maybe grounds me. I'm not quite sure what it does. And so I just thought like it might be fun to share some of those quirky things that really are like the end goal. If I know if I can get through the next 15 minutes of writing, I can go brush my teeth and come back, I'll be good. So what has been that thing for you all?
Well, I'm motivated by charts. It just is, right? So I have a habit tracker and I get to color in a block whenever I accomplish writing, because that's one of my goals. I have multiple goals, like drink 3 bottles of water, walk, things like that. But I get motivated by seeing the colors on my little chart. That makes me excited.
So it's funny that you have a habit tracker. Is it the James Clear, the Atomic Habits habit tracker? Okay. So it's funny because I read that book and I was like, oh, I'm going to print out the stuff that he includes from his website that he's referencing in the book. And it ended up like I would just want to color it in. So I would be like, oh, yes, I have to do that. And it became like this almost compulsive, like if I don't do this, like everything's going to fall apart because then I'll have a day where the habit didn't stick and then my habit's not going to stick. And so it was like this whole, like, I'm like, I can't do that because now it's just adding another layer, which is why like I prefer like I look at my week and I'm like, where is this going to fit? And so that's really sort of how I do it. I don't have a whole like I reward myself. I get in, and maybe it's just the way that my brain works. I have like just like probably 2 flow states a day, like early in the morning, like after my kids are off to school. And the dog's been walked and my hair's been curled. I sit at my computer and I do my thing. And then I need like the rest of the morning and the afternoon to do like the email returns and the PowerPoints and that kind of thing. But I teach usually at night. My classes, I don't think I've had a class that starts at 6:30 since my very first term that I started working at UC. I tend to be the 8 p.m. girl. And if there was a 9:30 class to teach, I would teach a 9:30 class. I have a lot of doc students who are on the West Coast that I work with in my doctoral cohort. We meet after 9:30. Like we meet at 9:45. We meet at 10 o'clock. So last night I didn't get off of my call with one of my students who's in Hawaii. We didn't get done until 11 p.m. And then I was still going. So I ended up looking into something else. The next thing I know, it's 1 p.m. I'm like, great, I got this chunk done. So I tend to have my flow states at night and early in the morning. Honestly, if I could just exist, I would totally just work from 6 p.m. through the next morning and then sleep in the afternoon. Like I would do that. I would be like a cat. in front of the sun sleeping. But that's not how life works. And I have children, so that I'm not allowed to do that. So for me, it's like figuring out when I can get into that state. And once I'm in that state, I can stay there for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes more. But the little chunks, it's just, I can't do it. My brain doesn't work like that. I tried it. It doesn't work for me. The Pomodoro method, I tried that too. That doesn't work for me. It's chunking and knowing that that's what I have to focus on. I love the late night wee hours because my kids are in bed. My dog's in his crate. My husband's asleep. No one's bothering me. It's like heaven. So I'm able to do that, just because the hustle and bustle of the day with kids and lawn guys and neighbors and barking dogs and the UPS guy that he insists on protecting me from. So it's like all of these different things that come up during the day. So it really helps for me to have the uninterrupted time.
I don't think I have anything quirky. Maybe I should, as like a little reward boost. Like, what would it be for me? Because right now I'm just in the stage of stop thinking about it and just sit down and do it, because I can like talk myself out of some of these things that I know work. So it's just getting away from those stories and just sitting my butt in the chair and opening the document and doing it, and letting it be less dramatic. It's not so serious, you're going to spend a little time working on this and it's not that big of a deal. So, but maybe I need a little boost.
Yeah, I guess the way dopamine works, I'm right now blanking, am I right with this, is that little boost could become addictive. So you don't want to become addicted to brushing your teeth or as Dr. Bonfini was talking about, coloring the chart. So maybe like keeping your dopamine levels where they are is a good thing. So, go ahead.
I was going to say, for me, I had to get out of this habit of trying to find productivity hacks because I kept looking for different hacks. Like, if I just did this better, if I just did that better, I would get faster, smarter, blah, 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 have more time to write. And what would happen is I would, like with the habit tracker, I got a habit tracker. I had pages of it. I had the professional habit tracker, the personal, the fitness, the parenting, the household. And then I had color codes. And like, it ended up being like a project. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm spending all of this time coloring squares instead of sitting my rear in the seat and doing the work, right? Instead of going, okay, I'm going to go to work out for a half hour. It's like, oh, I need to do it because if not, then I'm not going to meet my habits. And it's like, what am I doing this for, right? So it was too much for me. I couldn't handle it. LA, you seem to be able to handle it just much better. But I had
it speaks to our preferences, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really the message is you don't have to do it like everybody else. You've got to figure out what works well for you. Because like you, when I had babies, my writing time was 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. That's when I wrote my dissertation, right? Because that was the only time that I could focus and really get things done and didn't have to worry about babies pulling things off the table I was working on and things like that, Whereas now, at my age, that is not possible. Like, I can't do that anymore. So also recognizing that you change over time, because now I am definitely very much more productive with the 20 to 30 minutes each morning before I open my email. But that was not who I was in my 30s or 40s, right? This is with my AARP card that, this is the way of life. So it's like it's changed.
I'm writing. This is like a passion project that I'm working on with an editor, and it's really about sort of telling stories of doctoral students who have made it through the dissertation process, but there's no outlines, there's no tips and tricks. It is really kind of showing that what keeps folks from moving forward or just like whatever, like the process is your life. Like, it's not sitting down to write APA to like do your APA. It's sitting down with a toddler and a pregnant belly to try and edit your work. That's the hard part. You know what I mean? So it's not the project, it's the everything else that really folks struggle with to get through and are incredibly resilient and figure out a way to do it, you know? So, you know, without getting too deep about it, it's kind of like also just remembering like why you're doing this, you know, because folks burn out and it's not the most important thing in your life. Like there are lots of super important things happening that deserve your attention over, you know, your dissertation slot to write, and that they're going to demolish your calendar and say, no, you have surgery in a week and you've got to rest this month, you know? And so maybe it was back to what Robin, you know, Dr. Simmons was saying about the positive regard for yourself. It's just like, that's inevitable. And I mean, I've experienced that. I know my colleagues have. And so when that becomes the quicksand where you're just like, this is my identity and now I feel like crap about myself because I've got to take a month out for medical leave or whatever, it's like that's when it becomes bigger, where it's like, no, it's not that important really. So knowing the why, I think of like why you're even doing this can sometimes be important, not to get stuck there too much, right? Because that can be another thing to ponder and procrastinate on. But knowing, having that as your anchor for me has been helpful when it feels just kind of impossible, and then just not doing it, because there are times where, you know, you just don't do it. You're just not going to write. You're just not going to be productive. And our lives are bigger than that. So that's
I want
not
to jump
helpful.
in on that, Adrienne, if you don't mind, because I think sometimes giving ourselves permission to take a break is so important. You know, I mean, some of my doc students who are on this call, I've said, you need to take a week off. You know, you need to step away from this, focus on format, not content for a little bit, you know, and giving yourself permission to take those breaks is super important.
And you know what, I will say this, in LA, we had a conversation with a student where you said, listen, we don't get that much time off as faculty. I'm going to be protective of my break. Here are the dates I am not available. And I was like, oh, I like this. This is good. And so when you got off the call, I said to the student, I'm like, we should model that and take that break too. And so when we had our next doctoral, you know, class session, I was like, hey, why don't we all do this? Right? We've worked incredibly hard. If you want to do some writing here and there, that's fine. I was like, but we're not going to meet. I'm not going to be giving feedback in this period of time. Right? This is just how it's going to be. Right? And then I had one of them where it's like, here's my draft. It was like Christmas Eve. And then like New Year's Eve was like, did you have a chance to look at it? And I had to have a conversation. I'm on break. I was visiting family out of state. And I thought I was being very clear when I said, I'm not reviewing drafts. Like you had my out of office. And so I think even if you've gotten used to the fact that things are moving along, to take that break or have somebody else take the break, it can even feel jarring to other people. And how do you still keep that boundary? Because I will say on Christmas Eve, there was a part of me after sort of midnight mass, my kids are in bed and the house is quiet. I'm like, I could just open my computer. I could just knock it out, right? Because there was a part of me that wanted to do that. And then I was like, I don't want to spend the wee hours of Christmas reading somebody's most recent revision. Like, that's silly, right? I can take the break. I'm allowed to take a break. She should be taking a break as well, right? And so I do think that whenever that's modeled, I think we should all get on board with that, because that's a nice train that's going to move into a nice place and a productive place and a place where you can rejuvenate and rest and relax. So definitely take your breaks when they are offered, given, provided, or make them your own. Take your own breaks. One of our faculty members, Dr. Hatfield, she and I were talking about sort of once you become a chair and you get all these drafts at once and how to manage it, how to sort of carve out time for yourself. And she's like, oh, on super hectic weeks, she's like, my out of office goes on at noon on Friday. It gets turned back on 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock on Monday. She's like, so they know not to expect a response after that time. I'm very clear about it. I'm not available until Monday. And it's fine. I was like, that's a really good, strategy. So we all have these different strategies. And I think learning from other people who have incorporated them and have really had this sort of balance is a wonderful way to not only like keep yourself on track, but also to keep everything within perspective, right? Because we only have one life, right? We don't want to spend it all at work.
So we have a little bit of time left. I'm wondering if any of you have questions for the panelists.
I'm going to jump in once while everybody is thinking. The one thing I would say is I had to also learn not to try to write at home. So I go to the library. So when I'm going to write, I go to my local public library, I sit at a table and I write, and I don't log into my email. I don't log into anything. And that has been one of the best strategies that I've ever had. I also am fortunate to have William and Mary literally right down the road. So I can go to their library, which just inspires research and scholarly engagement. But I did find having to leave my house, because here I think about the laundry, I think about the kids, I think about the bills, I think about my email, right? So that is another strategy that I would mention, is maybe find your sweet space to write. For some people, that's Starbucks, right? Which I can't do because I'm a people watcher and I am so into what everybody else is doing and saying, it doesn't help me. But the library, finding that back corner table where I can zone out, and I've trained my body to be, this is writing time, right? This is not email time. This isn't grade stats papers time. This is, time to read dissertations and time to write. And that has been a huge, huge help for me to find that space.
Can I just add one thing? I'm sorry, my camera's not on. It's Dr. Dean. I was up all night with a sick dog, so you cannot see what I look like right now. But anyway, one thing I was gonna say, that's great advice, Dr. Stretch. And also, trying to sign up for writing retreats whenever those are given are really good. So like this upcoming weekend, I was selected to be a part of the Melanin Scholars Writing Retreat, which is, I guess, I don't know a lot about it, but it's a whole bunch of Black women PhDs, and they're actually going to have writing blocks where we sit there on Zoom together in a quiet space and write. And so that's going to be like so freaking helpful. So if you can find writing retreats, or maybe we can start one, that is purposeful time. I need that in my schedule, because if I'm obligated to someone else, I'm more likely to do it. Just like if my friend says, let's work out, I'm going to go work out. But if I'm just left to my own devices, I'm going to sit down and watch, Netflix. So.
And remember that we have a Get Writing Fit challenge in March, which is also that process. And one of the things that I am hoping to get started, Dr. Dean, which I was going to talk to you about on Monday, were writing circles. So that's something that I'm hoping that we'll be able to launch soon. Mm-hmm.
Let's do it.
Well, as you continue to think about what questions you might have, and I know we have other colleagues from the UC faculty on here, and so I encourage you all to pipe in and share as well. I just kind of wrote some things down, like the themes that I heard. First and foremost is knowing what works for you is the most important thing, but you have to know yourself first. So maybe take a few minutes to just reflect on how you feel productive, how you understand your own motivation, and then also, like, are you a chunker? Are you a biter? And like, what is it going to look like? Does it need to be on your calendar? Do you need to just have a every day you wake up and you do X, Y, and Z? And then I think being connected to others is just foundational to who we are as counselors, and that comes out too in perhaps our writing strategies. Dr. Dean talked about it, Dr. Baggs talked about it, Dr. Bonfini talked about it. I definitely am somebody who needs that connection with other people, and it is truly, as Dr. Bonfini said, what motivates me. I don't want to let anyone down. And then giving yourself permission to lean into others for help. As Dr. Baggs talked about hiring an editor, I've never in my life thought about it. I'm so excited about this. This is going to be something that I put into place. And then setting boundaries. You will be on the fast track to burnout if you think you have to write your dissertation in 2 weeks. First of all, you're not going to be able to do it, but also it's not healthy. When we go back to self-care for counselors and that proverbial reference to what flight attendants tell passengers on a plane, put the oxygen mask over yourself before you help somebody else. You have to take care of yourself. You have to say, I need to set some boundaries here so that I am restored and able to then be productive. All right, so I see we have a question.
Hey, yeah. So my question, I guess, kind of goes to the boundaries piece of this. I think in internship, Dr. Bonfini, we had the conversation of like, when I'm done with dissertation, I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, I have all this free time and it feels good. But I know that that's probably going to, like, I'm not that type of person. So I'm just going to find more things to do with my time, right? So I guess my question is, how do you pace yourself as far as the projects that you take on? Is there any things that any boundaries you set when it's like, this is not a project for me? Or do you just say yes to everything coming your way? Or do you say, okay, this is a project I want to work on, but I'm going to set it to the future, this future date when I finish this project? How do you kind of manage that inflow and outflow of your research?
I would say that you need to make a professional development plan, and to be intentional about it, right? Set goals for yourself for this year. Like, I just took on this position as the director of scholarly engagement. So my focus this year is not taking on a bunch of other new projects, but to focus on getting my pace, getting my grounding on this, because I'm taking over from people who've done this for a long time and did really amazing, like Dr. Baggs, and I don't want to let anybody down and all that, so I've got to focus on that. Whereas, last year it was, I wanted to get back into travel, right? And so that was my focus. So you have to be intentional, at least for me, I have to be intentional, and I always try to set a plan. So I spend part of my holiday break thinking about, what do I want to accomplish personally? What do I want to accomplish professionally? And what may have to give a little in order for those things to happen, and adjust accordingly. Don't just keep adding on, but recognize that we have a pie chart, and that when one gets bigger, the rest of it has to get a little smaller, right? You've got to adjust. So that's what works for me, Ginevra. I mean, it's just being intentional about it.
So one thing that I have done, and I haven't done it for probably a year or two, so I need to revisit it, is I know we all have statements of teaching philosophy, right? We all have, if you do clinical supervision, you sort of have one for supervision too. Like, here's my style as a supervisor. These are my expectations. These are some things that I would like you to do. Like, it's sort of a contract. I have one that's sort of like my statement of research. Like, here are my areas of interest, right? And they fall within probably, 4 main spheres, and some of them interact with each other. And that's fine, right? But those are my interests. And if a project is aligned with the interests and I have the bandwidth and the time, I'll do it, right? I say yes to that. But if it's really outside of sort of that scope that I have for myself, I'll decline. That's because it doesn't fit with really what I'm really interested in, what I want to do, where my expertise lies. Because if I'm interested in it, if it's part of that whole, that's my big top 4, like, then great, right? But if it's not, if it's something that's more tangential, I'm going to get bored. I probably will burn out. I'll do it, but I won't like it. So I don't want to do that. So some things I do say no to. So that's how I do it. So I do think it's really helpful to say, okay, what is it really that my focus is? And how can I make sure that I am continuously looking at those things that interest me, and I'm growing my body of knowledge, and I'm, touching other topics, and then I can use that to inform my teaching. So I tend to stay within like certain realms.
Just from like a perspective of bringing new faculty into programs who are students, like students who have just graduated, right? And then they're moving into faculty positions. there's a lot of fundamental things about our processes and systems of the field that I just think are either ridiculous or I disagree with, and they're here. So even though I personally think like being multi-passionate is a really cool thing, like having a lot of different interests and being able to explore. So as a student, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like you guys should have full freedom to do that. And when you go out to apply for a job, if you're moving into the faculty role, probably the hiring body is going to want to see that you